Hello, my darling. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, we are continuing our lovely excursion into Irish myths and fairy tales, specifically involving the Buga. And I am just noticing something odd. Let me see if I can fix. So unfortunately, with Mac, you can't just use a transparent background or VTube Studio. So I'm having to manually adjust different things for my model, but unfortunately it's making some parts of me see through. And as much as I would prefer to have the green outline gone, seems like I'll have to kind of muddle through it. Well, at the very least, seems the transparent hair is now gone. Oh well. Maybe one day soon I'll be able to get all this fixed up. Well. But we'll just have to keep working hard until I get everything I need to update my system. But you are not here to hear those things. You're here to listen to my stories. And so here we are. Our first tale is called The Puka of Moreau, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. The unfortunate hero of this narrative was returning home one night along an avenue which lay between the hedge and a wood, trees of which stood so close that the boughs interlaced. He was not naturally subject to superstitious fears, but he could not be otherwise than frightened after advancing some distance. On hearing a rustling in the boughs overhead, keeping pace with his own progress, looking up, he was terrified by the appearance of a dark object visible through the foliage and boughs where they were told were not too close. In the dimly defined outline by the obscure light of the sky, the form that was a goat, and it kept nearly over his head, springing from bough to bough as his shaking limbs carried him forth. The only encouraging idea that occurred to him was that he would soon be at the border of the wood, and that, in all probability, the evil thing would trouble him no further. After what seemed a very long time, though it probably occupied but a few minutes, he was under the last tree. But while hoping for the cessation of his torment, the dreadful thing in full comparison of a he-goat
Relapsing MS is
dropped onto his shoulders and bent him down on all fours. He retained his senses and merely strength enough to creep on painfully, laboring the while under such a sensation of horror as perhaps none can comprehend except those who have endured the visitation of such a nightmare. He could not afterwards form any idea of the time occupied by his staggering home under the fearful burden. His family heard the noise as of a body falling against the door. Once it was opened, and the poor head of the family was found lying across the entrance, insensible. They brought him in, laid him down before the fire, had his hands chafed, water thrown on his face, etc., till he recovered consciousness. He was confined to his bed for 2 or 3 weeks with pains and stiffness in his bones and joints, as if he was suffering under a severe attack of rheumatism. As there was no intentional deception on the victim's side, perhaps the delusion and illness may be accounted for by his lying insensible for some time in a damp place, and being called on while in that state, by that dreadful visitation of the nightmare. The Purga's headquarters in Ireland are Carrigafuga, west of Macroom, in Mere River, a locality dreaded by sailors and fishers at night, or, in bad weather, the most frightful noises being heard there at these times. Give me one quick moment. There is something needing my attention real quick. So many things requiring my attention all of a sudden. But do not worry, I have it all fixed now. At least for the time being. Our next story is called Taming the Puka, attributed to Dr. McAnally Jr. The west and northwest coast of Ireland shows many remarkable geological formations, but, excepting the Giant Causeway, no more striking spectacle is presented than that to the north of Galway Bay. From the sea, the mountains rise in terraces like gigantic stars, the layers of stone being apparently harder and denser on the upper surfaces than beneath, though the lower portion of each layer, disintegrating first, is washed away by the rains, and a clearly defined step is formed. These terraces are generally about 20 feet high and of a breadth varying with the situation and exposure of from 10 to 50 feet. The highway from Innis Ballyvown, a fishing village opposite of Galway, winds by a circuitous course through these freaks of nature, and on the long descent from the high land to the sea level passes the most conspicuous of neighboring mountains, the Corkscrew Hill. The general shape of the mountain is conical. The terraces composing it are a wonderful regularity from the base to the peak, and the strata being sharply upturned from the horizontal. The impression given is that of a broad road carved out of the sides of the mountain and winding by an easy ascent to the summit. "'Tis a Pooka's path, they call it," said the carman. "What's a Pooka?" "Well, that's not easy to say. It's an evil spirit that does be always in mischief. But sure it never does serious harm, except to those who deserve it, or those that speaks of it disrespectfully. I have never seen it, glory be to God. But there's those who have, and be the same token, they do say that it looks like the finest black horse that ever wore shoes. But it isn't a horse at all, for no horse would have eyes of fire, or be breathing flames of blue with a smell of sulphur. Saving your presence, or a snort like thunder, and no mortal horse would take the leaps it does, or go as far without getting tired. Sure, when it gave Tim O'Brien the ride it gave him, it went from Gort to Athlone with one jump, and the next it took him it was in Mullingar, and the next was in Dublin, and back again by all the way to Killinley and Limerick, and never turned a hair. How far is that? Faith, I do not know, but it's a power of distance, and clear across Ireland and back. He knew it was a puka because it spoke to him like a Christian mortal, only it wasn't agreeable in its language, and will never give a decent word after you're on its back, and sometimes not before either. Sure, Dennis O'Rourke was coming home one night. It was only a boy I was, but I mind him telling the story, and it was a fair in Galloway he'd been. He'd been having a sup, some says more, but when he came to the Rath, and just beyond where the fairies danced, and furnished the wall where the policeman was shot last winter, he fell in the ditch, quite spent and tired completely. It wasn't the length as much as the wideness of the road was in it, for he was going from one side to the other, and it was too much for him entirely. So he laid still for a bit, and then tried to get up, but his legs were light and his head was heavy. And when he attempted to get his feet in the road, was his head that it was at, because his legs couldn't balance it. Well, he laid there and was beat entirely, and while he was studying how he'd rise, he heard a trotting of a horse on the road. "'Tis myself will get the lift now," says he, and laid waiting, and up comes the pooka. When Dennis saw him, by gosh, he quivered his face with his hands, and turned on the breast of him, and roared with fright like a bull. "Ah, think you sneaking blackguard," says the pooka, mighty short. "Leave off your bawling, or I'll kick you in the head into next week," he says to him. But Dennis was scared and bellowed louder than before, so the pooka, with his hoof, gave him a crack on the back that knocked the wind out of him. "Will ye lay off," says the pooka, "or I will give ye another, you roaring dough-face." Dennis left all blubbering, so the pooka got his temper back. "Stand up, you guzzling sarpent," says the pooka. "I'll give ye a ride." "Please, your honor," says Dennis, "I can't. Sure, I've not been after drinking at all, but smoking too much, and at the moment, and as sick as I am not intoxicated." "Oh, ye drunken buzzard," says the pooka Don't offer for to deceive me, lifting up his hoof again and giving his tail a swish that sounded like the noise of a cataract. Didn't I track you for 2 miles by your breath? Says he, and you smellin' like poteen factory, says he, and the nose on your face as red as a turkey cock. Get up, or I'll lift you, says he, jumping up and cracking his hind foot like he was doing a jig. And as an aside, I do apologize if I'm reading slowly or taking a moment or two to pause. This is a story that is written in a very accented manner, so it's taking me a moment to properly decipher it. Dennis did his best, and the puka helped him with a grip of the teeth on his collar. Pick up your cabine, says the puka, and climb up. I'll give ye a ride as you'd never dreamed of. If it's pleasing to your honor, says Dennis, I'd ever walk. Riding makes me dizzy, says he. "'Tis not pleasing," says the puka. "Will ye get up, or will I kick you in the stuffin'? Out of your cowardly carcass," says he, turning round and flourishing his heels in Dennis's face. Poor Dennis tried, but he couldn't, so the puka took him to the wall and gave him a lift at it. And when Dennis was mounted and had a tight grip onto the mane, the first leap he gave was down the rock there, 1,000 feet into the field, you see, and up again, and over the mountain, and into, they say, into the sea, and out again, from the top of the waves to the top of the mountain. And after the poor doggerth of a ditcher was nigh into dead, the puka came back here with him all, dropped him into the ditch where he found him, and blowed into his face to put him to sleep. So, leaving him, and they found Dennis in the morning and carried him home. No more could he walk for a fortnight, by reason of the weakness of his bones, or the ride he had had. But sure, the puka's a different beast entirely to what he was afore King Bryant Boru tamed him. Never heard of him. Well, he was the king of Munster and all Ireland, and tamed the puka once for all on the Corkscrew Hill Furnacety. You see, in the old days, the country was full of evil spirits, and fairies and witches and devils entirely. And the harum they done was, on sayin', but they were always coming and going, like Mulligan's blanket, and without so much as saying, by your leave, the fairies would be dancing on the grass every night, either by the light of the moon, and stealing away the children. And they they took that, and many of the ones they took that never came back. They would wrath on the hill beyond was full of the dead, and after nightfall they'd come from their graves and walk in a long line, one after another, to the old church in the valley, where they'd go in and stay till cockcrow. Then they'd come out again and back to the Rath, sort of a parish without a witch, and some nights they'd have a great entertainment entertainment on the Corkscrew Hill, and you'd see them with snakes on their arms and necks and ears, by way of jewels, and the eyes of dead men in their hair, coming for miles and miles, some riding through the air on sticks and bats and owls, and some walking, and more on pukas and horses with wings that would come up in line to the top of the hill, like the cabs at the Dury O Theatre, and leave them there and hurry off to bring more. Sometimes the old enemy, Satan himself, would be there at the entertainment. Entertainment? Coming, and a monstrous dragon. Coming as a monstrous dragon, with grand scales and eyes like the lightning in the heaven, and roaring fiery mouth like a lime kiln. It was a great day then, for they do say all the witches brought their reports at their seance, for to show him what they had done. Some would tell how they stopped to water in the spring, and inconvenienced the neighbors. More would show how they dried the cow's milk and made her kick the pail, and they'd all laugh like to spit. Some had blighted the corn, others had brought rains on the harvest. Some told how their enchantments made the children fall ill. Some said how they set the thatch on fire. Some more told how they stole the eggs, or spilled the cream in the churn, or bewitched the butter so it wouldn't come, or lead the sheep into the bog. Lead the sheep into the bog. But that wasn't all. One would have the head of a murdered man be her mains, and would it be the hand of him hung for her mother, or the murder? One would bring the night she scuttled a boat with, and sent in, they say, to where the corpse laid of the fisherman she had drowned. One would carry on her breast the child she had stolen and meant to bring up an evil, and another one would show the little white body of a baby she had smothered in its sleep. And the corpse candles would tell how they deceived the traveler, bringing him to the river. And the evil spirits would say how they threw him in and down at the bottom in his sins, and then to the pit with him. And old Beelzebub would listen to all of them with a reporter like that after taking down the speeches at a league meeting. By his side, writing what they said, so as when they came to be paid, it wouldn't be forgotten. Well, at least it's good to know that he pays his workers. I wonder if it's commission or salary based. Or perhaps hourly. I hope the one that took a child to raise as evil gets a good stipend. Those were the times for the Pukas too, for they had power over them that went forth after night, excepting it was on the variant of mercy they were, but sort of a sinner that hadn't been to his duty regular would ever see the light of day again after meeting a Puka's thin. For the beast would either kick him to smithereens where he stood, or lift him onto his back with his teeth and jump into the sea with him, then dive, leaving him to drown, or springing over the cliff with him and tumble him down to the bottom, a bleeding corpse. But wasn't there the howls of joy when a Puka would catch a sinner unbeknownst and fetch him on the corkscrew when on the nights Satan was there? Ah, God to find us. What a sight it was. They made a ring with the corpse candles, while the witches tore him limb from limb, and the fiends drunk his blood in red-hot iron noggins with screeches of laughter to smother his screams. And the Pukas jumped on his body and trampled it into the ground, and the tempest would whistle and churn, and the mountains about would keep them, and the Pukas and witches and spirits of evil, and corpse candles and bodies of the dead, and devils would all jig together round the rock where old Beelzebub would be smiling, as for to say he had no better diversion. God's presence be with us. It makes me quiver to think of it. Reminds me of Night on Bald Mountain by Fantasia. Well, as I was after saying, in the time of King Brian, the Pookas done a Del O'Haram, but as then that they murdered were drunken beasts that were in the shebeens in the day, and in the ditch by night, and wasn't missed when the Pookas took him. The king paid no attention, and small blame to him that. One night, Queen's baby fell ill, and the king says to his men, says he, "Here, Riley, get you up, and on the white mare, and go for the doctor." "Musha thin," says Riley, and the king's country house was in the break of the hills, so Riley would pass the Rath and the corkscrew on the way after the doctor. "Musha thin," says he, "Paisley on the quiet. It's myself that doesn't want that same job." So he says to the king, "Won't it do in the morning?" "It will not," says the king to him. "Ye lazy beggar, that's my bread, and at the life saving my child, eating my bread, and the life leaving my child." So he went with great slowness, took the white mare, and off, and that was the last seen of him or the mare after. For the Pooka took them. Sort of tastes of a lies in it, for them's that said that they'd seen him in Cork 2 days after, trading off the white mare, was deceived by the spirits that made it seem to be him when it wasn't, that they'd trick o' doin'. Well, the baby got well again, because the doctor didn't get there. So the king left bothering after it and begun to wonder about Riley and the white mare, and searched for them but couldn't find them. And then he knew they were gone entirely, because, you see, the Pooka didn't leave as much as a hair of the mare's tail. "Were thin," says he. "Is it horses that the Pooka would be stealing? But cease to its impudence. This will never do. Sure, we'll be ruined entirely," says he. "Mind ye now, to my constant from what he said, that the king wasn't concerned much about Riley, for he knew he could get more Irishmen when he wanted them. But what he meant to say was that if the Pooka took to horse stealing, he'd be ruined entirely. So he would, for where would he get another white mare?" So it was a mighty serious question, and he retired within himself in the court with a big book that he had the town secret. He had that told secrets. he decides for learning, and the king acquired to his school master and a head that would circumvent a fox. So he read and read as fast as he could, and after reading without stopping, caring for a bit of supper for 7 days and nights, he came out, and when they asked him could he bait the puka now, he said never a word, excepting a wink with his eye, as for to say he had him. So that day he was in the fields and alone by the hedges and ditches from sunrise to sunset, collecting the materials of a dose, the materials of a. Once again, I'm trying to translate this. It's taking me a moment. Collecting the materials of a doe's fur, the puka, but what he got, faith, I don't know. No more does anyone, for he never said, but kept the secret to himself, and didn't say it even to the queen, for he knew the secrets run through the woman like water in a ditch. But there was one thing about it that he couldn't help telling, for he wanted it, couldn't get it without help, and that was 3 hairs from the puka's tail, excepting which the charm wouldn't work. So he told a man he had he'd give him no end of gold if he would get them for him. But the felly pulled of his cabine and scratched his head and says, "Fakes, your honor, I don't know what good would do me to have gold if the puka gets a crack at my carriage with his hind heels, and he wouldn't undertake the job on no wages." So the king begun to be afeared that his loaf was dough. But it happened at the Friday, this being on a Tuesday, that the puka caught a sailor that hadn't been on land only long enough to get a bit of drinking in, and got him on his back, so jumped over the cliff with him, leaving him dead enough. I go bail. When they came to search the sailor to see what he had in his pocket, they found 3 long hairs round the third button of his top coat. So they took them to the king, telling him where they got him, and he was greatly rejoiced, because now he believed he had the puka, sure enough. So he ended his enchantment. But as the evening came, he was a doubt in the mind of him flushed away. Even the 3 hairs were out of the puka's tail. Charm would be good enough, but if they weren't, and was from his mane instead, or from a horse instead of a puka, the charm wouldn't work and the puka would get to top of him with all the feet he had, and at once and be the death of him immediately. So this night and Prior's argument struck the king with a great force, and for a bit he was on obstinate, but with a little circumvision he got round to it, for he confided he had absolution so as he'd be ready. Then he told one of the servants to come in and tell him after supper that there was a poor widdly in the boreen beyond the corkscrew that wanted help that night, that it would be an errant act of mercy he'd be on. So and so safe again, the puka if the charm didn't hold. Sure, that'll be good o' that, says the man. It'll be a he that won't it work. Do you be easily in your mind, says the king to him again. Do as you're told and don't argue, for that's the point of metaphysics, says he. Fix was a deal of deep learning he had. That's the point of metaphysics, and the more you argue on them subjects, the less you know, says he, and it's through for him. Besides, even if it's a lie, it'll deceive the puka, and that's no metaphysician. Metaphysician, and it's my belief that the end is good enough for the mains, says he, thinking of the white mare. So after supper, as the king was settling afore the fire, and had the charm in his pocket, the servant came in and told him about the widdy. The gob, says the king, like he was surprised, so as to deceive the puka completely. If that's true, I must go relieve her at once. So he rose and put on sower boots with spurs on 'em full across, and took a long whip in his hand. For fear, he said, the widdy would have dogs. Then went to his chest and took his old stocking and got a serving out of it. Oh, hello, call me senpai. Thank you so much for popping in. Oh, 'twas only a shillin' when he was to do everything so well, and went out with his right foot first, and the spurs rattling as he walked. I've had a lovely day. Thank you so much for asking. As since you had missed it, this story is written in a very accented manner, so it's taking me a moment to properly decipher it. He came across the yard and up the hill beyond and round the corner, saw nothing at all, then up the fourth path round the corkscrew, and met neither a sow or dog that he cast stone at. But he didn't go out of the road or to the widdy. for he was fearful that if he met the puka and caught him in the lie, not being in the road to where he said he was going, it would be all over with him. So he walked up and down because the old church below there on the rath on the hill, and just as the clock was striking for 12, he heard a horse in front of him. He was walking down, so he turned and went the other way, getting his charm ready, and the puka came after him. "The top of the morning to your honor," says the puka, as polite as a Frenchman, for he had seen by his clothes that the king wasn't a common blackguard like us, but was one of the royal quality. "Me service to ye," says the king to him, as bold as a ram, and when the puka heard him speak, he got prettier than ever, and made a low bow and scrape with his foot. Then they went on together and fell into discourse. "'Tis a black night for travelling," says the puka. "Indeed it is," says the king. "It's not me that would be out in it if it wasn't for a case of necessity. I'm on an errand of charity," says he. "That's real good of ye," says the puka to him. "And if I may make bold to ask, what's the necessity?" "'Tis to relieve a witty woman," says the king. "Oh," says the puka, throwing back his head, laughing with great pleasingness, and nudging the king with his leg on his arm, by ways that it was a joke. It was because the king said it was to relieve a witty he was going. "Oh," says the puka, "'tis myself that's glad to be in the company of a intelligent gentleman that's on so pleasing an errand of mercy," says he. "Oh, how old is this witty woman?" says he, busting with the horrid laugh he had. "Musha thin," says the king, getting red in his face, and not liking the joke the least bit. "For, just between us, they do say that before he married the queen, he was a laddie-buck with the women, and the queen's maid told the cook, that told the footman, that said to the gardener, that told the neighbors, that many the nights the poor king was awake, white as a hare from sun to sun, with the queen Angothsharin at him about the same. More betoken, there was a witty in it that was as sharp as a rat's trap, and surrounded him when he was young, and hadn't as much sense as a goose, and was like to marry him and want and in spite of all his relations, as widdies understand how to do. So it's my constant that it wasn't decent for the puka to be a laughing that away, and shows what evil spectres is dirty blackguards that can't talk with gentlemen. "Musha thin," says the king, because the puka's laughing wasn't agreeable to listen to. I don't know that same, for I'd never seen her, but I believe she 100 and as ugly as Beelzebub. And when her old man was alive, they tell me she had the temper like her grandfather, and was as easily to manage as an armful of cats, says he. But she's in want, and I'm after bringing her a serving, says he. Well, as the puka says, well, the puka said his laughing, for he saw that the king was very vexed, and says to him, if it is pleasing, where does she live? At the inn of the Boreen, beyond the corkscrew, says the king, very short. Begob, that's a good bit, says the puka. Faith, it's true for you, said the king, more betoken, it's uphill every further that way, and my back is broken entirely with the steepness, says he. The way, by way of hint, he'd like to ride. Will you honor get upon my back? Says the puka. Sure, I'm after going that away, and you don't mind getting a lift? Says he, fallen like a stupid beast he was into the trap the king had made for him. Thanks, says the king, I believe not. I have no bridle nor saddle, says he. Besides, it's the spring of the year, and I am a fearful you're shedding, and your hair would come off and spoil my new breeches, says he, letting on to make excuse. Have no fear, says the puka. Sure, I never drop my hair. It's no ordinary garron of a horse I am, but a most uncommon beast that's used to the quality, says he. Your speech shows that, says the king, the clever man he was, to be polite that away to a puka that's known to be a devil out and out. But ye must excuse me this evening, as, do you mind, the road's full of stones and monstrous steeps, and you look so young. I'm fearful you'll stumble and give me a fall. Arthin, says the puka, it's true for your honor, I do look young. And he began to prance on the road, giving himself airs like an old witty man after wanting a young woman. But my age is older than you'd suppose. How old would you say I was? Says he, smiling. Begorra, devil if I know, says the king. But if it's agreeable to you, I'll look in your mouth and give you an answer, says he. So the puka came up to him, fair and soft, and outstretched his mouth as he thought the king was wanting for to climb in, And the king put his hand on the jaw like he was going to see the teeth he had. And then, that minute, he slipped the 3 hairs round the puka's jaw. And when he had done that, he drew them tight and said the charm, crossing himself the while. And immediately the hairs wove cords of steel and held the puka tight by way of a bridle. Ara, now, you bloody beast of a murdering devil, you, says the king, pulling out his big whip that he had concealed in his topcoat and giving the puka a crack with it under his stomach. I'll give you a ride you won't forget in a hurry. my dear. How long have I been muted? Oh no. I was almost at the end of the story. Oh dear. I'll just go back a bit, I guess. Or do you in chat remember the last thing that I said to you before I accidentally muted myself? Oh, that's so unfortunate. Don't remember. I'm literally on the last paragraph. So, essentially, King entrapped the puka, ran him round in a circle until morning, and made him promise never to kill a man or steal another horse. And apparently, after his enchantment by the king, he hasn't been the same since. Nowhere near as vicious. And it's out of devilment entirely that he does it. Speaking, apparently. Because he can be polite, as you know, by what? I've told you of him saying to the king, and that proves that I said to you that evil spirits can't learn real good manners, no matter how hard they try. But the fright he got never left him, and so he keeps out of the highways and travels on the footpaths and isn't seen so often. And it's my belief that he can do no harm all that at all to that fears God. And there's them that says he never shows himself nor meddles with man, no mortal bearing there in drink. And maybe there's something in that too, for it doesn't take much drink to make a man see a good deal. And that, my dears, was the final story involving the puka. Why incidental, I suppose, that my microphone was muted for part of that story. I'm so sorry for that. If you are watching this on YouTube, I will be sure to try and edit that out for you. But next time, we will be starting the section over the Banshee and the Dullahan. But without much further ado, my dears, I'm afraid that we have to call this the night for today. I do hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope that you were able to get some manner of peace in my voice today. I do hope that my glimmer will bring you back to me and enjoy more time together. But until then, we will see each other next time. Goodbye, and sleep well, my dears. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, please feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and if you wish, leave a comment down below. On each side of me, there should be other videos from my channel that you may or may not wish to look at. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining me.